Welcome to Lightways Astrology with me, Isabel, and I am so excited today because I have Patricia Walsh with me, and she has written Understanding Karmic Complexes, Evolutionary Astrology and Regression Therapy, which of course is right up my favorite bits of my work, which is past life regression and astrology. And Patricia, welcome.
Thank you.
So now, I guess it's hard to know where to begin with this because this has got to be my sort of like the top 3 astrology books ever that you've written. and I would say it's the book that I wanted to write but haven't got round to. So tell us a little bit about it. What is within your book?
What is in the book? Well, at the time when I wrote it, which is now quite a while ago, there was about 10 years of research in there of my work with clients in regression therapy and crossed over with the chart in evolutionary astrology. But I can tell you the way that it really happened was I trained with Dr. Roger Woolger in regression therapy, or we call deep memory process. And after my training, I was also at the same time training with Jeffrey Wolf Green, who's the founder of evolutionary astrology. So for my own learning, what was happening is as I was regressing clients, I would then look at their chart and write their past life stories on the back of their charts. And I had boxes of these, like thousands of them, that I was just doing for my own fascination, for my own learning, because the unique principles that Jeffrey put forward in evolutionary astrology, as far as there's rules about that modify the normal way of looking at the nodes from everybody's moving from their south node to their north node, like if you have a square to the nodes, or there's a whole bunch of caveats. And all of a sudden, I was seeing this in black and white in people's regressions. So it was basically proving the evolutionary astrology paradigm. But it never occurred to me that it was material for a book. It was just my learning. And then it was actually Roger who, this is exactly how it happened. One day I was preparing for one of my first lectures ever. I was terrified because I still hadn't gotten regressed out of me my fear of public speaking. And Roger and I had shared a house and a practice together in New York. And so I have all these boxes out and all these charts splayed all over, and I'm preparing material. And Roger comes trotting by on the way to the kitchen to make a cup of tea and says, "What is that? What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm preparing for a lecture." And he said, "Oh, well, that's enough material for a book." And then, like, literally, it was like the room spun for a minute and the light bulb went off. And so that's really how that book came to be. But it came after, a massive amount of research and documentation.
It strikes me as obvious that you would see the correlations, because when you're reading a chart and you know it works, the person's talking to you, you're hearing the chart being expressed, so the symbols work, but now you're extending them to past lives. And the beauty of it is you can actually see that because you're working as a regressionist, and that it's a magical thing that I've seen as well when I'm working with past lives and I look at the chart. So you have these theoretical notions about how to read a chart from a karmic perspective. But the beauty of it is that when you actually start working with past lives, it comes to life.
Yes. Well, I would say that my book is as phenomenological research as you can get with 2 obscure subjects like astrology and past lives, in that I mean, I know it's added to the body of work understanding karma and astrology, because it's all of my deductions in the book, like, I've organized it by archetype, right? So in the Aries archetype, if somebody had a South Node in Aries, most of astrology up until now has been projecting what that means from the present day, the way we know that the archetype acts in present day experience. But mine flips it around and says, no, 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 this is what the human psyche has taught us it means, right? I'm not telling anybody what their South Node in Aries means. I put together, 1,000 case studies that, here's these people with Aries South Nodes, and these are their past lives. That's phenomenological research.
Exactly, and that's what I love about it. It's bringing it to life. That's what I was wanting to say. Something about bringing the theory to life, and
the stories, the client stories. Just I love. We were talking about it before, Gemini Moon. I love stories and storytelling and the power of storytelling. And then seeing hearing people's stories or witnessing people's stories, and then, in comparison to the symbols in the chart, especially as they're expressed through evolutionary astrology, it just brings it to life in a way that, theoretical alone can't do.
No, that's right. And reading the stories that you've encountered through your regression work, I sometimes, I'm particularly, the Aries one, actually, as we're on the subject, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, how much can a soul take? How does a soul take? Some of the experiences that one soul goes through from life to life to life until suddenly the penny drops and something changes. That's extraordinary.
Mm.
You feel that sometimes?
Well, trying to think of how to be succinct about this. To me, evolution is not just a mental. I know you express it that way. I'm sure you don't mean it that way, but I'm splitting hairs. It isn't just a getting it. It literally is wounds to the soul, and they're so subconscious because they're in the soul, right? And so our subconscious alone is subconscious. And then, if you take Jung's perspective of the individuated and collective unconscious as part of the subconscious, they're even deeper. They're in the basement, under the basement. But yet they direct and inform so much. So these wounds to the soul direct and inform so much of who we are that we're soaking in it, and we don't even know we're soaking in it, right? We're born with these complexes and these past unhealed experiences that either inform us through avoidance of certain things because of a subconscious fear, or preferences for certain things, right? Because of a way of protecting ourselves, or defenses, even past defenses that were built in past lives as a way to survive certain traumas. So to me, the whole picture is more complex than that. The healing that's needed is what slingshots the evolutionary process. And that's also clearly demonstrated in my book, that you can see that once we unwind the knot that's in that South Node, the person, and because in my work, we go into the afterlife and we do the resolution of all the imprints, and then the consciousness just automatically, with no direction from me, will automatically start talking about their North Node symbol. It's quite amazing to me. So for example, like, in the Aries, I think in the Aries chapter, right? So, Aries, you have like Libra on the other side. Or actually, I was thinking of one that I had in, trying to remember which, was it Taurus or Scorpio into Taurus or something? Scorpio being so bound up in so many intense wipeout, absolute Armageddon kind of lives. How does, that's more than a mental concept to undo that kind of complex. Somebody is just going to come into this life with the volume turned up to 1,000, always waiting for the shoe to drop, always feeling they're going to be betrayed or something's going to be swept out from under them. And then for that person to get to the soft, sweet comfort of the Taurus North Node, of that sense of physical security, right? And sensual security, just soft and sweet and simple, that's quite a journey. But I've seen people do it in one session. It's absolutely amazing.
Exactly. And we can't overemphasize the power and the beauty of the healing process, because when you consider that these wounds have been carried over lifetimes, to come to a point of healing is, for you to witness, for me to witness, is quite an extraordinary experience. And then, let alone what the individual is feeling as they come to that point. And yes, that getting it is something about understanding and just connecting with something that liberates the soul.
Yeah.
It's a rather poetic way of putting it, but I feel it's liberation for the soul, because it's no longer trapped in that pattern that keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, it's absolute liberation. I mean, and on an energetic level, it actually releases this kind of raw primordial energy that's been bound in the complex, and gives it back to the bound in the complex in the past, right? Like frozen in the past, and gives that energy back to the current life, psyche and soul. So yeah, I mean, it's quite magnificent when people are able to move through that. And then, and it's not even, I mean, sometimes it's highly dramatic, but other times, lots of my clients will say to me after a session and, a follow-up weeks or months later, they'll say, the change is subtle, yet it's absolutely pervasive. Like, they're not triggered by things, that their sense of presence is different. Their sense of their, being at home in their body is different. Their sense of being in their life is different. That's a very pervasive healing, because it's happening on that soul level.
It's funny because, you talk about subtlety. There are times when I speak with my clients following up from the work we did in the previous session. And I asked them specifically about the things that they were hoping to heal and change. And they've almost forgotten that they ever had that problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, of course, there's lots of the dramatic ones, like when it's a physical thing and then the physical thing is gone, or when it's a phobia or a panic and then that's gone, like instantly, people, that's very dramatic and overt. But for so many complexes, especially psychological complexes, again, it is dramatic, but it's also like exactly what you're saying. They're like, oh, I used to be afraid of that? Really? Oh, yeah.
I'm reminding them because I'm checking to see, how they're doing based on the work we did the previous time. And they've forgotten they ever had that need. And yet it was something that had been haunting them for years.
Yeah, or mostly blocking them or thwarting them,
Exactly.
like relationship patterns or self-worth patterns or guilt, right? Guilt,
yeah.
This kind of unexplained guilt or just sense of self, right? It was so pervasive when they came to you, and then they're like, oh yeah, I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah. It's so we've been kind of talking about the experience. We haven't really said much about the astrology itself. And maybe it might be nice if you could just outline which parts of the chart you are first looking at when you read a chart from an evolutionary angle.
We always start with Pluto. So it's evolutionary astrology is primarily a Plutonian paradigm, right? So so the chart, it's like looking at an X-ray as opposed to, the 3D person. So when you go to Pluto in the nodes, that is what we would call the karmic axis. So that's going to give you, I don't even know what people's sun signs are unless they're involved in the karmic axis, because it's so irrelevant, right, to me and the work that I do. I'll remember people's Pluto and their nodes and anything that's involved in that axis by aspect. But the rest of I'm making light of it, but it's true, right? I don't have to look at anything more in the chart. I could spend 10 years with somebody and we would still be getting depth, deeper and deeper meaning, and deeper healing just from Pluto in the nodes, right? Just from that interpretation. So again, in evolutionary astrology, like I said before, there are certain caveats that, based on aspects to those things, based on rulers of the nodes, based on conjunctions, squares to the nodes, that modifies the interpretation, which is where Jeffrey Wolf Green departed, or where evolutionary astrology as a paradigm departed from that regular understanding of we're all moving from our south node to our north node. And that's what I was saying. My book, in essence, kind of proved his paradigm, because especially with squares to the nodes and the way that evolutionary astrology looks at them, it is different than just moving from the south node to the north node. And case after case after case of a person's own experience with that aspect proves that point.
I think for me, the nodes, the way I've always felt them, is that perhaps it's less about movement and more about, because I was never happy with the notion that you're meant to forget everything from the south node, because surely your experience, good and bad, whatever it is that is described in that south node, there's going to be good things and you want to bring those with you. Those are the gifts. And also I think the thing that really used to, I guess, for me was problematic in that just that pure interpretation of moving from one to the other, is where you've got them, where let's say you've got an Aries north node and a Libra south node going the other way around in the houses, so that Aries is in the 7th and Libra's in the 1st. I always felt to me that it's not so simple as moving from one to the other here. There's got to be a much more integrated approach to this. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate in looking at the way that you're looking at the chart in this context, is that there is that complexity. It's not that simple.
No, it isn't. And what you described is basically true for anybody with a Virgo or Libra ascendant chart. It's what we call paradoxical chart in evolutionary astrology. So the whole chart will be flipped like that for some Virgo ascendants and Libra ascendants. And that points to an internal paradox, right? So a person like that's going to feel that. There is a case in my book of a woman with a Pluto Libra in the 1st house. And she embodied one of her past lives embodied the reluctant warrior archetype, right? So, a young man who's going through an initiation, doesn't want to go to war, goes to war, and then is like, stabbing people, but apologizing to them at the same time. right? So a person who feels that inner paradox of like, I want to belong and I want to be a man and I want to be initiated, but I don't want to hurt anybody in the process. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. The choices that life throws at us inevitably are very complex. And so it's, and I really appreciate that, looking at using your method of looking at a chart. I love that the way that it reflects the complexity of experience, human experience. So I've been
well, you know, when you think about it, if you take Pluto and the nodes alone, forget even rulers and aspects, but you have Pluto by house and sign, even just take Pluto in the south node. This is a very simple view. Pluto by house and sign, south node by house and sign. That's already 4 archetypes that are blended into that soul's experience, right? Then you add, you know, aspects to the nodes, aspects to Pluto, which is also going to pull it into what we call the karmic axis. And you're, you know, up to 6, 7 archetypes by the time, you know what I mean? That are all expressions of the soul's experience in past lives. So it isn't so simple as just a south node and north node, outside of the fact that the principle of the nodes in evolutionary astrology, you know, they're looked at the evolving ego from past lives. So Pluto would represent the wounds to the soul and the force of evolution upon the soul. And the nodes would be seen as the evolving ego structure that soul has used in past lives. And then what you would see are wounds to the ego structure and what's carried there. So we're already looking at 2 very deep dimensions of the human psyche, just looking at that through that perspective.
The popular notion of karma, which of course you and I have discovered to not be right, is this notion that you're just going, you know, you atone for the sins of one life in another, and it's really not that simple. But I wonder if you could perhaps describe what you feel is the soul's mandate coming into an incarnation, as in, is it purely to relive a pattern, or is it to heal and learn? Because surely if there's evolution, it can't be that everything is predestined.
Well, I don't think predestiny, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, fate versus free will. But I don't know predestiny plays into it as much as that the soul is caught in the complex. So, you know, if you take, I'll give you an example. In traditional or in esoteric Tibetan Buddhism, their picture of reincarnation is very different than the Judeo-Christian, you know, Western world that has taken a deep concept like karma and kind of made it, you know, chewed it up and spit it out back for the Western mind. It's a much deeper philosophy in Eastern traditions. So in esoteric Tibetan Buddhism, their picture of the way that somebody reincarnates is that you enter into these afterlife bardos, what they call them, and you encounter, you know, the light of your original nature, but you don't recognize it as your own light. It actually happens 3 times according to their tradition. And you keep progressing through more and more dense bardos that are made up of your own mental, emotional, and etheric complexes until they get increased, because you're not recognizing your true, what they would say, Buddha nature, right? You go into this increasingly dense, denser and denser bardos until your demons are chasing you and your own complexes become personified as these demonic-like beings that are then chasing you, and you're running in terror, and you go and hide in a cave. This is the soul's experience, goes to hide in a cave, and that cave is the next womb. So what we come here with from that perspective is I think I wrote this in my book, right? We are trailing stardust, we come in trailing stardust and all of our complexes because they sent us running into a symbolic womb, because in the spirit world, like attracts like. So you've jumped into a womb for safety, into a cave for safety that ended up being the next womb, kind of, trailing your unhealed mental, emotional, and physical complexes. And by physical, I mean those carried in the etheric body, the energy body. So it's a matter of re-imprinting. That's something I talk about in my book. If we really look at how trauma affects the human psyche, we are all subject to that force that Freud first identified, called repetition compulsion. And this is also what the Kalin chakra, the wheel of rebirth shows, again from the Tibetan perspective. The soul is not without its illusions. The soul is not. The soul is subject to Maya and samsara, right? To forgetting, to getting wounded, to getting bound in complexes. And that's what happens, right? The repetition that gets caught in the repetition compulsion. And just getting it on a mental level is not liberation, right? It really needs to be rotor-rooted from the soul on the emotional and the etheric levels.
Exactly, which is why sometimes that understanding an issue
it doesn't heal it, right? 20 years of psychotherapy, right?
You've got to work through it. So, well, I think listeners will be wanting to learn so much more. And in order to help you to do that, I will make sure that there is a link to Patricia's book in the notes accompanying the podcast. The book we've been talking about is Understanding Karmic Complexes, Evolutionary Astrology, and Regression Therapy. Patricia, how could people get hold of you?
My website, healthepast.com, and kairosastrology.com.
And I'll make sure the links to that are also in the notes accompanying the podcast. Patricia, thank you so much for speaking to us on Lightways today.
Great, thank you so much.
And if you'd like to also watch the interview that I did with Patricia about her chart, you can see that on Life Astrologer on YouTube, and the link will also be accompanying the notes here. So thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.